In a quiet suburban neighborhood, a routine afternoon turns into a shocking confrontation. An elderly black woman, Miss Clara, known for her warm smile and love for her garden, finds herself at the center of an encounter she never expected. A police officer, responding to a minor complaint, arrives with an attitude that quickly escalates. What starts as a simple misunderstanding spirals into something far more troubling as the officer's actions leave bystanders stunned. But just when it seems like the situation has reached a breaking point, something incredible happens, something no one could have predicted. This is a story about justice, humanity, and how unexpected moments can change everything. Stay tuned to see how this intense encounter unfolds and the powerful twist that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. You won't want to miss what happens next. It's a story you'll never forget. Miss Clara had lived in the neighborhood for decades. Everyone knew her as the kind-hearted woman who always greeted others with a wave and had a knack for helping anyone in need. That's why it was so shocking when the police officer showed up at her doorstep. A neighbor had reported something trivial, an overgrown hedge creeping into their yard. Miss Clara was already planning to trim it, but before she had the chance, this officer arrived. From the moment he stepped out of his car, there was a tension in the air. His tone was sharp, his movements abrupt, and his words seemed to carry something more than just authority. The neighbors who gathered nearby couldn't believe what they were seeing. Miss Clara tried to explain calmly, but the officer cut her off, his voice growing louder. What started as a simple conversation was now turning into something far more alarming. As the officer's voice rose, Miss Clara's hands trembled slightly, but she stood her ground, her voice steady and calm. She tried to reason with him, explaining that the hedge was just a minor issue she was already working on, but he wasn't listening. His body language grew more aggressive, and his tone carried an edge that made the watching neighbors uneasy. A few people whispered among themselves, wondering if they should step in, but no one dared yet. Meanwhile, Miss Clara's grandson, Jamal, who had just come to visit her that afternoon, stepped out onto the porch. His presence seemed to agitate the officer further. Jamal kept his voice calm as he asked what the problem was, but the officer's glare shifted toward him. The tension was palpable, every word charged with unspoken hostility. The crowd grew, phones appeared, and someone quietly started recording. Something felt inevitable, but no one knew what. The officer's voice was booming now, demanding that Jamal step back and let him handle this. Jamal stood his ground, keeping his hands visible and his tone measured. "I'm just here to make sure my grandma is okay," he said, glancing at Miss Clara, who gave him a small nod of reassurance. But the officer wasn't calming down. His hand hovered dangerously close to his holster, and the crowd watching from across the street grew restless, their murmurs turning to shouts for someone to de-escalate the situation. Miss Clara, despite her age, took a step forward. "Please, officer," she said, her voice firm but kind. "This is my home. There's no need for all this." Her words, though gentle, seemed to challenge the officer's authority, and his expression hardened. Jamal shifted protectively closer to her, and for a moment, the air was thick with a silence so heavy it felt like time stopped. Just as it seemed the situation couldn't get any tenser, another police car pulled up, its siren cutting through the uneasy quiet. A second officer stepped out, her demeanor noticeably different, calm, composed, and observant. She took in the scene quickly, Miss Clara standing firm, Jamal shielding her, and the crowd growing restless. Walking over, she quietly asked her colleague for an update, but he dismissed her with a curt wave, clearly agitated. The second officer turned to Miss Clara, her voice steady and professional. "Ma'am, may I speak with you?" she asked, her tone far gentler than her partner's. But before Miss Clara could respond, the first officer interrupted, insisting that he had everything under control. His agitation was now directed not just at Miss Clara and Jamal, but at his own colleague. Meanwhile, someone in the crowd shouted, "We've got it all on video." The officer froze for a moment, his gaze darting to the phones recording him. The second officer noticed the shift and stepped between him and Miss Clara, her calm authority suddenly making her partner's hostility even more glaring. It was clear something deeper was unfolding, but what and how far would it go? The crowd held its breath as the tension reached a boiling point. The first officer's face was flushed with frustration as he argued with his colleague, his voice rising. But the second officer stood firm, her calm demeanor unwavering. "This is not how we handle things," she said clearly, making sure everyone could hear. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, it seemed like the situation might de-escalate. But then, the first officer took a step toward Jamal, his posture aggressive, as if trying to reassert control. That's when Miss Clara, in a move that stunned everyone, stepped between them. "Enough," she said firmly, her voice carrying a quiet power that silenced even the officer. "You're here because of a hedge, and now you're about to hurt my family for no reason. Is this who you really are?" The question seemed to break something in him. His posture slackened, and for the first time, he looked around, really seeing the crowd, the phones, and his own partner watching him with disappointment. Slowly, he stepped back. The second officer seized the moment, guiding him away and telling the crowd they will address the situation properly. As the police cars pulled away, the neighbors erupted into cheers, supporting Miss Clara and Jamal. But just as things seemed resolved, the twist came. The person who had called the police, a neighbor Miss Clara had often helped, approached her with tears in their eyes. "I never thought it would go this far," they said, voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I should have known better." Miss Clara's response? A quiet, graceful nod. "We all make mistakes," she said, her words carrying forgiveness even after everything. It was a moment of humanity that left everyone in awe, and a reminder of the strength it takes to lead with kindness, even in the face of injustice. As the evening settled over the neighborhood, the tension began to ease. Neighbors who had stood silently before now approached Miss Clara and Jamal, offering words of support and gratitude for their courage. The video footage taken by bystanders quickly circulated online, sparking conversations about accountability, empathy, and the need for change in how such situations are handled. Miss Clara, ever the symbol of grace, went back to tending her garden the next morning as if nothing had happened, though the community around her felt different. People who had once passed each other with polite nods now stopped to talk, offering help, sharing stories, and building a stronger sense of unity. Jamal, inspired by his grandmother's quiet strength, decided to get involved in local community initiatives, determined to make a difference. The incident became more than just a confrontation. It became a turning point, reminding everyone that even in conflict, kindness and courage can inspire change.